fixing this small thing is going to have a big impact on your entire golf swing. There is no such thing as a perfect takeaway because it does depend on what the rest of your swing does. However, there is a pattern that robs so many of you of better golf shots, and it's an inside takeaway, and why it happens is so easy to fix. The golf swing happens in a split second. So the less we have to manipulate during that movement, the more consistent we're going to be. And a lot of that stems from setup, yes, but a lot of it happens from the very start of our swing. It's not about one size fits all, because an inside takeaway, which is what we're trying to combat today, is when you're bringing the club more on the inside. What happens when you bring that club on the inside too much? It's not necessarily a problem that it's going inside, it's what happens later. Because unless you keep sort of turning and you have a flatter swing and you have a different anatomy where your arms are shorter than your height, it's going to make life a lot harder when it comes to coming back into impact. Because if we're down and around here, it's going to come over the top, which we're going to struggle with. But it also stems from what most people don't realize. What's happening with the wrists creates an occurrence. Things that happen in the rest of the entire swing that your body tries to compensate for. And what happens is, when we have too much of an inside takeaway and we don't rotate because we know we're getting a bit stuck here, what happens is our wrist ends up flexing too much, which whips the club inside. And you think, well, that's not the end of the world. I've only come this far. I just now need to swing up to the top. But for me to get that club, square at the top of the swing to make it easier to come back down, I have to manipulate. It's much easier to make a change or a modification just here when we're starting the swing, rather than when we're up here trying to twist and manipulate everything as it's happening. It makes life a lot harder. And what happens is, when you're flexed at the top of the swing here, that club face can often be too shut. Then we know it's too shut, so then we either dip down this way or we swing over the top like so. So this inside takeaway screws up our pattern. The wrist working incorrectly screws up the entire swing. So before you go and belt long shots, I want you to just practice very little smooth movements, okay? You don't even have to hit shots when you do this, but we're just trying to rehearse that movement where the butt of the club is staying in here. Be aware of what is happening to your wrist. Are you too much on the inside? Are you too much on the outside? Just keep working on this little movement here. You'll start to see that this affects everything else. So the better you get at having a reliable movement to here, it makes everything easier as you come through. So you can practice that again and again and again, just hitting little chip and pitch shots. Work on those wrist conditions to make the most out of it. But if you want to really advance it, we can use one of my favorite tools. To help demonstrate, I've got on my friend here the Hack Motion device, and it's going to really help show exactly what's happening when we get the takeaway wrong. Because one of the key metrics that we can see by using this, that every time when we have an inside takeaway or many swing faults stem from having too much flexion in this lead wrist. When this lead wrist is moving out that way in that sort of pattern here, you can see on the screen, when it moves that way, that moves the club inside. But as we talked about earlier, that has to now create basically diversions and compensations. So we can help speed our learning up dramatically by working on a takeaway that actually feels like we've got a little bit more extension, right? Where it's almost, don't be afraid of it too much, but it's almost cupping in the takeaway. So the butt of the club is pointing nearer to my thigh here, right? So that it's pointing nearer to my thigh. I've got this more extension. The club is almost outside my hands. and the butt of the club is pointing inside to my thigh. What happens from here is I can just wind up now, and hey presto, that is a pretty flat wrist, and I can bring it back down with very minimal alterations or manipulations. But if I let that flexion happen, it's going to cause too much flexion at the top of the swing and then compensations because of it. And you can see on the app there exactly what that did. It didn't happen later in the swing, it happened at the very, very beginning. I just set myself up that way to have too much flexion and I was screwed. So now, if I just work on this little takeaway, trying to get that movement correct with a little bit more flexion, right? I can then from here make a backswing and swing through, and everything starts to move a little bit better. So on there, what we have is a little bit too much extension at impact because I overdid it, but that's a good thing. That's what I was trying to do. I got the backswing component right, but I maintained it too much going through. So this is what I mean. It shows that what happens here affects the top of the backswing and most importantly, what happens at impact. So I'm going to try again, basically keeping my butt of the club here. I can even sort of rehearse it, just this little pause, right? Trying to get that correct or neutral at the very least. Swing back and then swing through. How did I do there? I came across it a little bit. Still a little bit too extended at impact. So I'm going to keep rehearsing this, my takeaway, and I'm actually just going to start with some smaller shots from here, trying to get that takeaway correct, swing up, then swing through. If you are interested in learning more about the hack motion, there's a link below and you can use the code Art2SimpleGolf to save 20% just for you. That was a little bit better. What we had there was the right amount on the backswing, and it enabled me to have that dynamic movement back into the ball, to have that stronger delivery at impact. So I can compress the ball. I'm not flipping at it as much, because usually if we go one way, the other way happens. So if I was too sort of bowed going back, it's going to cause me to flip too much this way. If I have too much extension this way, a lot of times it can cause a little bit there. But finding how you respond is the key, and the hack motion helps us show that. So there we are, my friends. Give that a go. Work on small shots. Pay attention to what the minutiae is doing, and the bigger stuff will take care of itself, I promise you. Now, if you want a great general swing concept that is going to give you more fluid power, this lesson is fantastic.